Where else would you rather be? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. Welcome to the people of Penn State. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State network. Well, today we are excited to feature Sarah Kernion. She is a distinguished global speaker and neurodiversity advocate, is first and foremost a mother of 3 children, 2 of which have non-speaking autism. Through her Instagram at Saturday's Story, she fosters a supportive community around the inchstones versus milestones mentality of special needs parents and neurodiversity, advocating for greater acceptance and valuing of the contributions of neurodivergent individuals in society. Sarah's narrative combines personal experiences with data-driven insights, aiming to shift perspectives on autism. In 2023, she officially launched Saturday's Story LLC alongside a charity, Milli and Mack's Marchers, supporting children with autism and their schooling and related services. Sarah holds a degree from Penn State in advertising and PR and communication arts with a minor in natural sciences, blending her interest in biology, public relations, and the science and study of human relationships into her advocacy work. Please welcome Sarah Kernion to the people of Penn State. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Paul.
It's good to talk to you. Good to talk to, I guess you can't say former Lion Ambassador, right? Because once a Lion Ambassador, always a Lion Ambassador.
I love kicking off with that. Once a lamb, always a lamb.
That's right.
I guess sharing my age dates me quite a bit, but yes, Lion Ambassador class of 2003.
All right. Well, we're going to walk backwards through time here together on the podcast. Let's start at the very beginning, though. You mentioned off camera that you're from Pittsburgh. How'd you become a Penn State Nittany Lion?
Oh, this is a wonderful story. My parents met at Penn State in the early 80s. My mom started her college education at Mizzou. She was a volleyball player and decided that she wanted to complete a degree in environmental engineering. And at the time in the early 80s, there were only a few universities that offered it, and Penn State being one of them. She's a Midwestern woman, born and raised, and she decided to not choose Nebraska, which is a very solid choice. And she decided to take a one-way trip in her car, and she came to Penn State her junior year, met my dad at the Newman Catholic Association in the Folk group, and the rest is history. My dad and his twin brother, both Penn Staters, and they met at Newman Catholic Association and were married soon after they graduated. I am the oldest of 3 children. My dad is from Pittsburgh, so they landed in Pittsburgh after they graduated and worked for Westinghouse. And I remember applying to other schools and getting far in the application process. And my parents said, "That's really nice that you think that those other schools will do. You're headed to Penn State in the fall."
Right.
And I said, "Well, how can we not explore all these?" And they go, "That's really, really nice. You're going to Penn State." And listen, it was the best. It was obviously the best decision. I witnessed growing up. They came to the Nittany Lion Inn for their anniversary every February. And now in their retirement, they bought a house in College Heights. So it's a wonderful story of just family tradition.
Oh, that's amazing. It's a family thing for you and
yes,
your brothers and sisters. So you come to Penn State, right? Not against your will, I assume, right?
That's right.
It's continuing the family tradition. As a student, what were you involved in here? We talked about Lion Ambassadors, but I know that you were involved in a number of different things here.
Yeah, I came freshman year. I jumped into, I think, a basic, homecoming committee, wanting to just foster a community of people outside of this large circle of friends that did come from my high school in Pittsburgh, and really saw the vast, the massive pride that just swells like in its magnanimity from a macro view as a freshman. And I believe he was the captain of that parade team was a Lion ambassador. And, that's freshman year. You can't apply for Lion ambassadors until sophomore year. And I had been toying around also with Greek life. I did not do that freshman year. So I just kind of explored a lot of things, and homecoming really got me, I guess taking a bite of my own Penn State sandwich, if you will, because of my family's history with it. I really wanted to make it my own. And I enjoyed that. I got a real taste of the tradition and the loyalty through homecoming of fall of 2001. And then ended up applying and doing Rush my sophomore year. I was chosen for Lion Ambassadors spring class of 2003 after rushing and pledging Pi Beta Phi sorority as well. So it was a really intense sophomore year. I felt like I completely forged my own path and felt I was making those smaller communities within the large Penn State community and realizing how much impact we all can have on a smaller level with who we are and our personalities. So that became my avenue. I'm not sure right now what it looks like, the makeup of Lion Ambassadors, but we were giving tours, and that allowed me to pull in and give a lot of vivacious like spirit to those people that were me, going, this is what my family does. We just go here. Right. And I like to say, yes, it is what your family does, and you can make it your own experience, which is exactly what I did. I don't have the same experience as my parents had in the early 80s, and that's okay. And that's what my sophomore year really led to. And then from there, it was off to the races. I really delved, deep into Lion Ambassadors. I was membership chair for them my junior into my senior year, and it became our family. It really became the family.
That's great. What committee were you on? You keep saying family. Were you a Fraser?
No, my sister was, though.
Okay.
I can't believe, of all things to bring up on the Penn State podcast, my sister's Fraser loyalty. I was an Atherton, classy, elegant, and tasteful.
Yes, that tracks.
Yeah.
Exactly. That you make a great point though about Penn State, right? Penn State is so big that you can make it smaller in so many different ways and have your own unique Penn State experience.
Absolutely.
So you came to Penn State, advertising, PR, communication arts, and then a minor in natural sciences. What was the initial career goal with that combination?
Right. So I came in as a biology or pre-med, I believe, and because I loved anatomy and physiology. My dad was a 30-year high school science AP physics teacher. So I have this craving and desire to learn about science, and I love the human body. So I had taken a number of those intro classes and realized sort of that my desire to communicate, and then through my experience at homecoming, how much I enjoyed the public relations side of it, I switched to the College of Communications and couldn't really let go of that desire to understand my body and my mind. And so I kept on and taking some of those natural science classes that were offered. Alongside that, went abroad through the College of Communications Manchester exchange program, and really loved that experience, understanding that there was another side to PR, which was sort of that international human communication aspect, which allowed me to come back my senior year and tack on that extra major, which, much to my parents' chagrin, is the classic fifth year victory lap. And I loved it. I thought that the communication arts and sciences major at Penn State blended all of those things. And the art of human communication from nonverbal to public was fascinating to me. So it really blended all the things that I loved. And I had a wonderful, mentorship and professors that I had my senior year.
Let's kind of dive into the work that you're doing today. First of all, let's just level set for people that might not be or might be less familiar. Can you talk about what you mean when you say neurodiversity?
Right. So there is a circuitry that our brains as humans have. And there's a typical circuitry for assuming people like you and I who have the typical development of all of their connectivity in their mind. And then you have neurodivergency, which has emerged as the term to be used for individuals that don't have the same typical circuitry in their brain, and how their development and how the skills and the building blocks of growth mentally are different. And autism obviously rises to the top as the number one neurodivergent diagnoses, but ADHD is also another neurodivergent diagnoses. And, we're really at the forefront right now with exploring how that kind of lens and circuitry of your mind can be a major win for the community, because it just allows us to see things from a different angle.
So the work that you're involved in today, that we're going to dive in deeper in just a minute, was born out of like personal experience, right? Can you share your family's experience that led you to the work that you're doing today?
Of course. They are my reason and passion for what I do. If you had asked me 10 years ago that I would be making a career out of public speaking on advocacy, I would have turned around and said, who are you talking to?
Right.
I graduated from Penn State and got a job with AstraZeneca working in South Brooklyn in New York. And again, it blended my love of the human body and sales. And for all intents and purposes, had a very, very typical 20s and into my 30s. My partner then at the time, we were married and had our first child and kept along that similar typical trajectory. It was when I was pregnant with our second that we moved out to New Jersey. And I really took a lot of great pride in not comparing my second daughter to my typical oldest daughter. I read a lot of books. I really loved Emily Oster out of Northwestern's Kellogg Business School, who talks a lot about expecting better for your second and third pregnancies, and how the children that you produce are not going to be minis of the one that you had. So to be open to that. So when I had my second and another girl, I really, really held a lot of space for her own development. Interestingly enough, it was because of that made me notice certain things that were far beyond just my second daughter, Millie, doing things differently than her sister, Morgan, but it was extremely delayed. And at some point, my gut started to check on things like, okay, it's not that she's not doing it in a certain timeline. It's that she's not even aware of what's going on around her to even develop a skill in any capacity. So that was around when she was about 18 months old. I was already pregnant with my son at the time, and life began to have a completely different film on it, because I was realizing that she wasn't in the same world and space mentally as I was and with my daughter. So that was the biggest foundational gut check for me. And that's when I began attempting all the things with her, from early intervention, observations, evaluations, everything under the sun, speech therapy, floor therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. And I'll never forget sitting around my dining room table with the early intervention team after they evaluated her. And I said, okay, she's not talking. She's 18 months old. How do we get this rolling? Let's just max out on speech. I'll pay private, whatever. And they all looked at each other. And, they're not physicians. They're the related service therapists and practitioners. And they said, this is more than just a speech delay. And I said, yeah. I get it. So what do we do? Let's max it out. Like I'm here. I'm a stay-at-home mom. Like this is my goal, is to help my daughter. And they said, this is more. Do you realize what the building blocks to language are? And I said, of course, it's play. I had my oldest daughter in Montessori school for a reason. And they said, she doesn't play. She's not actively playing. And there's no way for her to build language if she's not playing. And I could tell they were so hesitant, legally so, to not give me a diagnosis right there. They said, you need to immediately get to see a developmental pediatrician. So that was a real bottom of the bathroom floor kind of moment, when you realize this is more than just a speech delay. And I took a lot of, proactivity on finding a developmental pediatrician. It is a upward climb to Everest for any special needs parent looking to get even an appointment in that field. There's so few of them. The backlog is months and months. So when I realized that it would be 9 months until I could get in with any developmental pediatrician, I started sniffing out my little side networking ways to get an appointment with someone that could potentially help. And it turns out that my aunt is a pediatric allergist at WashU. Her partner's college med school roommate was a developmental pediatrician at Children's Specialized Hospital in New Jersey. So I was able to kind of, get in under the nod of, I really need this diagnosis to happen to get services started. And we did. We got the diagnosis of autism after 2 different evaluations. And it is a foundational change in who I am as a person after getting that diagnosis for Milli. It was a shift in how I saw the world. It was a shift in my motherhood. It was a shift in what I was charged as a person to do. And it completely shifted how I perceived what my life was going to be like. And there's a really a grief timeline that you go through in any loss, right? I talk about this in my talks about, grief doesn't really always have to be about death. It can be, while that's obviously the most poignant type, military service members who lose limbs, women who have, stillborn children who never see through the life of that child. Obviously loss of a significant other, but it can also mean the loss of the child that you had anticipated you'd have. Right. And I think that was one of the major shifts. And I'm glad I had done enough work on myself to be accepting of that. But that was a real moment for me, realizing, okay, Milli is not only her own person, she is wired and sees the world and is going to learn a million different ways differently than her sister and brother. Now, I always say that the universe gave me my oldest, who is the kid that you said not to touch the stove and she never touched the stove. So the universe gave me Morgan and then said, hold my beer, and then hold it again, because it was around 3 months. Milli was very much into all of her therapies. We were daily in observational evaluations, trying to get as much information about her from just how she was exhibiting being Milli to understand and teach her how to grow. At the time, my son was born. I have a 3-month-old now. And he had a really difficult time nursing. And I started to notice these little micro stims that were very indicative to me of the early signs of autism. And I told my spouse at the time, he's autistic too. I know. I'm noticing these little things, and they are very different. And I would bring him to every evaluation and follow up with the developmental pediatrician. And my son Mack ended up being one of the youngest diagnosed patients of this developmental pediatricians in her entire career. He was diagnosed around 21 months old, so under 2. And his autistic behaviors exhibited so differently than Milli's. A boy and a girl, 2.5 years apart, the baby of the family versus the middle, all these things that play into personalities and gender and sibling rank were also then exacerbated by the differences in how autism is displayed in a boy and a girl. So I'm glad I trusted my gut on that. I would hold him up to the developmental pediatrician at 3 months old and go, see, he's not. And she goes, Sarah, I'm not diagnosing a 3-month-old. I go, well, he will be your youngest diagnosed patient. I behoove you to trust the high functioning mothers that come in here with an understanding of autism and what those earliest signs are. So I was able to get him in about a year earlier into therapies and related services, which I believe has paid its weight over and over again.
What a inspirational story of you talk about creating space, right, for your child to be that child, right, and not in comparison to their siblings, and how that has kind of made a lot of the difference in the early diagnosis for both of your children. Were you at all? I'm thinking I have 3 children of my own. Were you at all surprised that your pediatrician didn't pick up on some of these things early on?
Yes, I when we had moved from the city to New Jersey, I was in a new pediatrician practice, and I remember very clearly Millie being, around that 18 months old, and the pediatrician saying, "She's a girl. She's so happy in your arms. She has an empathetic connection to you. She makes eye contact. If you're really nervous that something's, off, here's a slip of paper." And it was truly like an 8.5 by 11 with early intervention number for New Jersey on the top. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is how you have to do it alone. This is advocacy already. And I can say that now, but it was never a joint effort from a pediatrician. It was fully on me to make that stride for Millie. So yeah, I actually ended up switching general pediatrician's offices, mostly for my own probably mild stress,
Right.
That I felt from there, and not wanting to return to that environment, because I didn't feel understood. And I felt like I was seeing things that they weren't addressing, or they were seeing it and giving very little weight to how that was a daily, if not hourly, occurrence.
Sarah, over like the last 5 years, it has kind of hit the media, especially during the pandemic, since the pandemic, right? When people start talking about vaccinations, right? They start to draw kind of causal relationship to autism and neurodiversity. You have 3 children, right? I'm sure you have asked, like, why my second and third, but not my first? And so kind of help us understand kind of what some of the causes are that you've discovered through this journey.
Sure. I when it comes to the diagnosis rate, right now it's 1 in 36 kids are diagnosed with autism. And people tend to think, gosh, that number just keeps going up and up. I firmly believe that the numbers have always been there. It's that we have a much more acute ability to diagnose and to help the children at a younger age that have a different circuitry and neurodivergence. And I do believe that it's multifaceted. I think it is genetic, 100%. And especially when having the experience with my son and noticing at the, very young, arguably 4th trimester stage of, my pregnancy and his first 3 months of life, and noticing those micro changes.
Right.
I don't even give air really to the vaccine debate. I never noticed it as a timeline pinpoint for me in their change in development, because of my son, and making me realize that there were those developmental changes well before multiple vaccinations were given.
Yeah.
I think right now, in talking about it, I will never discredit the fact that a mother's intuition knows. And I think there are shifts that a lot of parents and mothers see around the time that those vaccines are being given in higher, concentration. But when it comes to, how and why, my 2 youngest versus my oldest, I do think there's a lot of genetic components that are to be explored. And right now, we did genetic testing. There was no mutation. There was no deletion. It's an unknown right now. And I think in a lot of life sometimes is accepting the unknown and accepting the fact that there's no answer for it. There's really no rhyme or reason as to why Millie, why Mack. There's the complexity on it is more dense than ever thought possible for why a certain human being is how they are. And I think what I've come to do is I treat Mack and Milli as fully functioning, capable, guaranteed individuals that I am to guide them to become the best versions of who they are meant to be, based on their genome, based on how they choose to interact, based on how they will grow and develop, which is exactly how my inchstone mentality versus milestones came to be during Milli's diagnosis process.
I want to go back to where you were talking about kind of the space that you were creating for Milli. Now that you have 3 children, right? And Milli and Mack are kind of the focus of a lot of your work and a lot of your talk.
Mm-hmm.
How are you creating that space for Morgan?
That's a great question. I have to give a nod to my parents on this. They, when I was growing up, they always carved out space for each one of us one-on-one every summer. And I sort of ran with that idea because it made me feel so special as the child growing up. So I made it a really big point, and have always, even before diagnoses of Milli, to carve out a one-on-one time with my oldest and create a lot of traditions with her. She's the only one of my children that was born in New York City. So she has a lot of pride in being the Manhattanite child and telling people that she was born in Manhattan. And we do a lot of one-on-one time together as much as we can. I also am very consciously aware that she is, for lack of a better word, dragged around to her siblings' therapies quite a bit, and waiting in the car and having to wait in waiting rooms. And I have very, very consciously decided, what, she does that for her siblings. Her siblings will be the same way for her, which creates a 10,000 time higher energy and preparation to bring 2 autistic children to a basketball game. But that's never stopped me from doing so. I've really become a student of interaction over isolation. There's a lot that is going to be so different in bringing Mack and Milli to support their sister, and it's a heck of a lot harder. One story that pops to mind, when my daughter started becoming, into travel ball in Westfield, and we were at games, 65 different games a year. And my son had a really hard time with the court sounds, that squeak, the squeaks, the buzzer, the ball. I mean, he was very, very on edge. And I just thought to myself, this is a non-negotiable. It might take us 10 times longer to get him used to these sounds in this environment, but we're going to do it. So I started a few years ago going to games and sitting on the court level with him by the exit door. Right. And he would listen to his songs that he liked and have an iPhone to watch his show. And he would still have very severe reactions and outbursts to the sounds and, environment of a court. But over time, then I would move to the first bleacher. And I sat in the first bleacher, and I would still cover his ears as the clock would count down for the different quarters. And then just in doing that, and what I realized through their own therapy, through ABA therapy, is that the repetition is always going to be yield the most positive outcome of what you want. So I just kept on it, and it became a thing where now they're just 2 other siblings that come to their sister's games. And it was not easy. It was not easy to get them used to that. However, now that they know that this is how we support our sister and whatever they're thinking about, that's how I mirror that for Morgan, is that we're all in this together. They're still your siblings. We look a heck of a lot different than a typical family, and that's okay. We can still model that support that she gives to hers as well.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people, like I mentioned, I'm a parent of 3. A lot of people just think it's a third of the day, a third of the day, a third of the day, right?
Yeah.
And we know that there's not that symmetry, right? And so that's why it's those chunks of moments and the intentionality around building time and spending time. That's right. It's not a minute by minute, right? It's more of like the experience by experience and the depth of experience that you're having.
And I think what you're saying, too, is meeting your child where they're at. Like for Milli, any verbal expressions have come more easily in song. Right. So, I mean, I could narrate and be a Broadway musical for Milli's life. I truly, truly, truly believe that growing up singing has only prepared me to be Milli's personal like orator, because if I could sing her whole day from start to finish, it gives her such satisfaction. So going to bed generally means that we just sing for 15 minutes. Now, my son, again, totally different autistic child, he wants to be scratched and he wants to have that pressure put on him, and that, the push and pull, sort of the rough housing before bed. And then he sort of digs his head into my chest or shoulder and twirls my hair. And it looks different. What's satisfying to each of them is so wildly different. And, then I have a typical 11-year-old who I recently came across this phase for tweens, which is teens are screw you, mom, but come tuck me in. and that's my typical oldest right now. So they all are so different, but I think it's meeting them with the kind of bond that that they need helps you become the best parent to them. Right. If I went in rough housing with Millie before bed, she would start saying, help me. Like, this is not what help me for Millie means almost anything. It means pay attention to me. So I think it's the greatest lesson in whether you have typical children or not, is meet your children with where they're at. It's not about what you want to do or what makes you feel good. What makes your child feel good? Because I think that allows them then to become the fully expressed versions of whatever phase of development they are at.
So I think the stat that you mentioned earlier was 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism, right? So this affects a lot more families than maybe we even realize, right? So what was it about you and your situation that turned you from being a parent of neurodivergent children into an advocate and an activist in this space? Tell us the story behind Saturday's story.
So I began blogging while I was pregnant with Morgan. So this is, 2012. Instagram had just really began. It was more of just a photo, filter site. And I was blogging on the side, and I became really tied to a number of different New York City metro moms, and just being really unapologetically vulnerable and bold about motherhood. And so I began Saturday's story both on Weebly and a blog, and then also on Instagram. I had a very tough postpartum experience with my oldest, with a lot of postpartum anxiety. So I began to share a lot of that, and found myself asked to speak at a foundation in Pittsburgh of a friend who lost their wife to suicide because of postpartum anxiety. And so I was realizing more and more that my innate desire to be vulnerable about what I was going through was very binding for mothers. And while I was speaking about postpartum anxiety and my just typical motherhood journey with Morgan, after Millie got diagnosed, the platform just grew. I still continue to talk about my postpartum experience to help others understand and feel like they're not alone, but it really shifted into special needs parenting. And again, I leaned in with a way that was allowing people to see you're more than a caretaker, that your individuality can still shine, and you can still find a lot of great satisfaction in your day-to-day as a mother, even when the cards are completely, flopped, not in your favor. And I use that sort of as this silver lining to life. It was a lens on life that I began to explore as to why do these diagnoses make parents or caregivers feel like a prisoner of their own life? Because I certainly didn't. I was very sad. I was very shocked. I felt like no one understood me, and that by sharing that, there were others out there that needed me to shed light into their own story. So the more I shared, the more, DMs I was getting. I laugh. There's like this pocket of moms in Melbourne, Australia that ask me all these questions. I'm like this mini micro celebrity in Melbourne for autistic moms because of the different services that aren't provided in Australia. However, I became sort of a one-on-one peer consultant in my town of Westfield, New Jersey, because you never discount the mom community Paul. It's very thick. And so I would have moms say, "Hey, Sarah, you blog a lot about this and post on Instagram. My friend's son just got diagnosed and she is not doing well. Would you mind meeting her for coffee?" And it was like, I couldn't run over fast enough to provide support or just an ear. And I realized that there were people that needed my help. And in doing so, I was providing such satisfaction to my own self on this journey, and allowing people to see the beauty in autism and pull back all the hard layers and say, at the end of the day, your child is still your child. And we're gonna do exactly what we did for your typical oldest or our other children that are neurotypical. We're going to make their road be as fruitful for them. And I think in doing so, it becomes a way of a modicum of life that frees the parents as well. And you just don't say no to any opportunity. Our neurodivergent children are going to experience the world differently, and the world is going to respond to them differently, and that's okay. And you rid that shame of that, and through my day-to-day stories on Saturday Story, I just felt like there was a major community that came together. And then there were parents and friends of friends, and then became all over the world, that were seeing the small wins as well as the emotional, peaks and valleys. So that's how it came to be. Last January, a woman in my town pinged me on Instagram, and she said, "I met you at a backyard COVID 40th birthday party. You helped me, you helped connect with my best friend that lives in Manhattan, who has a daughter on the spectrum. She had never known anyone else with a daughter with an autism diagnosis." And I'm reading this message. I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember, because I've been doing this so often and loving the one-on-one connection in town. And she said, "I work at LinkedIn, New York City. I need to find an autism awareness speaker for our internal ERG. I'd like it to be you." And I thought, no. I write, I blog, like I do this one-on-one. I love the one-on-one connection. I feel there's such beauty in like even this kind of conversation, Paul. Like I know there's gonna be people listening, but you and I are having this intense dialogue. And I love that. And she said, "Nope, I'm not taking you no for an answer. It's gonna be in April. You're gonna be great." And so I did. I ended up speaking at LinkedIn for their entire Families at LinkedIn employee resource group. And everything just really took off from there. The talk landed so well. I utilized my network. My dear friend, John Jordan, is a head of the Bank of America Academy, and he brought me onto his podcast. And I like to say that I was flanked between a 2-star general the week before and the Texas Tech football coach the week after. And my podcast and LinkedIn had double the amount of interactions and amount of commentary and praise versus the others. And I say that because I think never discount the tried and true mom story. Never discount how many people in your employee base and company need to hear from a special needs mom that it's going to be okay. And you can continue to keep leaning into that diagnosis, not in a fearful way, but in a interactive manner.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the those stats, and I can tell you're a competitive person that you went.
Oh, I love that.
That you went and looked at the stats, but it's what people talk about versus what people think about, right? And I'm sure that there aren't a lot of people talking about what you're talking about, but I'm sure that there are a lot of parents out there thinking about it, right?
That's right.
So to have these opportunities to hear other people talking about it, I'm sure is valued. Embedded in your answer was some great advice for parents. You talked a little bit about the power of storytelling and how that's helped you kind of expand audience, and not just expand your audience, but kind of bring people in closer to the conversation. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about what Milli and Mack's Marchers is all about, and some of the projects you're currently working on?
Sure. I originally started it the year that Milli got diagnosed, and I thought, okay, every April, let's just utilize the platform on Saturday's Story to do a fundraiser or, a charity event. So the first year was we did an Autism Speaks 5K locally and got friends and family together to join our team. Especially the ones that have seen, me since the diagnosis and then on. And we utilized, I'm trying to think, we've done a lot of different, every year it's been a little bit different where the money has gone to. I believe the first year we were doing the devices, the AAC devices, which are, which I call the talker for Mack and Milli. It's an app on a mini iPad that is basically a language and device that they can grow with them as they attempt to speak, but augment their ability to say what their mind is saying, but they're unable to actually, get through from their brain to their musculature and through their voice. And so, as as a parent, devices are expensive. And so we originally started off taking all the money and donating it to their special needs preschool to provide devices for children whose families couldn't afford them. I believe the following 2 years, I really noticed and was just so overwhelmed and flooded with gratitude for the number of practitioners that I realized were a part of this angel network of my day-to-day, these related therapy, these related services therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, music therapists, water therapists, and the list goes on. And then just the directors and coordinators of these places. So I did some luncheons and breakfasts at all the different related services providers to just say thank you to them, because they are the ones that are utilizing the science behind neurodivergency to allow Mack and Milli to be the best version and learn the best way. So I did that for a few years. Last year was a really, really cool fundraiser for Mack and Milli Marchers. I had gotten the privilege to go out to Montauk in summer of 2021 or 2022. And a friend's friend and family had a son with severe non-speaking autism, and they had a 22-minute documentary made about their son, Rocco. And it was about Rocco learning to surf because his parents and family were big surfers. And it's all about the story of how, while Rocco has non-speaking autism, he's also a part of, and because of who Sarah and their dad, Ben, as surfers, why couldn't he be a surfer? So they did this beautiful 22-minute documentary, and I sat alone by choice and was just, my mouth was agape, on the sand at this beach club out in Montauk, saying, I need every person that I know to see this movie, because it shows the relentless dedication of parents. It shows how skills can be taught to children that you think aren't going to be able to learn something. And it shows the unwavering support of a community that has their back. So I ran right up to these people that I had only known through a friend and said, I'm not taking no for an answer. I need this documentary shown in Westfield, New Jersey. And they were like, cool. We're on the film circuit right now at all these independent film festivals. Like, we'll talk to you in 2 years. And I was like, that's really great. How's next April? And they were like, Sarah, like, there's so many I'm rules and regs about films and documentaries. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is now a mission of mine alongside Mack and Milli. This is my mission. So I became friends with the family, and it was January of last year. The dad and mom called me and said, there's a window that no film festival can touch, and it's the last weekend of April. Can you do it on April 30th? And I said, yep, absolutely. So I brought Rocco Up, the movie, to a independent, really cool old theater in Westfield, New Jersey. I had 3 showings of it. I had a panel discussion. I had a child-friendly version too. Rocco, his parents, the director, the executive producer all came in to do a Q&A. And it's just a really beautiful, digestible film. So we ended up showing Rocco Up, and it was arguably the best Milli and Mack Marchers campaign. We used all the funds that we raised, donating it back to the independent filmmakers which is a 501c3 that produces films for showing the stories of special needs individuals.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story of persistence, right? And,
Yeah.
kind of just that strong advocacy that you've become known for now over the years. If people want more information about Mack and Milli's Marchers, where can they go to get that?
So right now, it's really just going to my personal business website, which is www.saturdaysstory.com. And I've been starting to tease a little bit of the fundraising for April for Milli and Mack's Marchers, but there will be more to come on the website. I'll put that out probably the last week of March. It's looking like we're going to be doing either a daily inchstones journal this year. And inchstones is the term that I've trademarked, that allows you to look at the smaller wins of your special needs child versus the milestones that are typically reached. So a daily inchstones journal is one idea, and then an inchstones coffee mug, because I do collect coffee mugs. There's much more expensive things I could collect, and but I do enjoy a good coffee mug. So there's going to be a very feminine pink one and a very masculine black with silver inchstones coffee mugs. So we'll see. That's going to do that, and I think I'm going to go back to the original fundraising cause, which is these devices, because from what I've gathered and did my own personal research on it, it's one of those things that is such a necessity for children, and if the parents can't afford it, it's such a lost way of furthering their education. So we're going to go back to doing the devices this year and seeing how much we can raise.
Sarah, as we talked about before we went on air, we like to have a little bit of fun at the end of each podcast with the lightning round. So okay. I'm going to throw a bunch of quick hitter questions at you. You just say kind of the first thing that comes to mind.
All right.
All right. Your favorite class at Penn State?
Nonverbal communication with Tammy Afifi.
Okay. If you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why?
Oh, my grandfather that has passed. He passed when I was in 6th grade. He's my dad's father. Stories that he would tell of driving my dad and my uncle through snowstorms to get them back to State College from Pittsburgh were something that always I remember in being with him as a little girl. He also survived the Doolittle raid in the Pacific during World War II. And I wish I could ask him more questions about that and his experience in the military.
Where would you take him in Pittsburgh?
Oh, well, listen, Eaton Park, it's going to sound crazy, but the taste of those Eaton Park cookies is so nostalgic for me. And it's him and my grandmother both, that open, buffet bar at Eaton Park, it's a taste of home for me. So I'm going to go with Eaton Park.
All right. Then that leads me to a next impromptu question. Eaton Park cookies or West Hall cookies?
Oh, okay. West Hall, only because my dad lived in West Hall.
Right.
My friend's boyfriend ended up living in the same room in West Hall as my dad did. And now when I go to visit State College up to my parents' second home, I do go with my children to West Halls for brunch. And my daughter snuck in a plastic baggie last time.
Oh, wow.
Pulled out 2 cookies for the ride home. And I said, my work here is done.
That's amazing. Attitudes have changed over the years about being able to take food out of the dining.
I know.
People are now allowed to take food with
them.
I
know. And I was very aware of that. And I said, sweetie, that they eat, you choose one or the other. But,
right.
At 11 years old, I think we'll give her a wink and a pass.
Yeah. Now, your most unusual we are moment, an unusual or unexpected place where somebody either caught you with a we are or you saw somebody and you yelled it.
So this is going back quite a bit, but when I was studying abroad in Manchester, through the College of Communications, my friend and I were traveling for a weekend, and we're hiking in Austria outside of Innsbruck, and we were on a hike, and I had a Lion Ambassador shirt on, and we were hearing these Swiss cows, these Austrian Swiss cows, jingling their bells.
Right.
And we were laughing because there was ice and there was snow, and we were in our Lion Ambassador gear, and someone coming down the mountain yells, "We are." And we honestly thought, Paul, that we were hallucinating. We were like, there's not a chance. We're hearing dairy cows on this, we're hearing clink, 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 clink. We're laughing about, Baby Bell cheese. And we're like, did we just hear a we are? And we're like, Penn State. So yeah, I think it was in, the Swiss Alps or the Austrian Alps. That was my weirdest We Are connection moment.
Great. That's great. How about your favorite Penn State sport?
Ooh, I have to tell you, Penn State men's volleyball has become a real fan favorite. Always have on my own. I had a number of friends that were on the men's volleyball team, but now in Rec Hall, and that the blue band comes now, and it's really a sport that I have brought all my children to. And I think when my typical oldest came to a men's volleyball, a Big Ten game, afterwards, she said, "Can we wait in line and wait for their autographs?" And she said, because my daughter is 5'4" at 11 years old. And she said, they're tall like me. So I would like to get their autograph. And I said, if this is the way she drinks the tea, I'm all in. So she has a framed men's volleyball, Penn State men's volleyball poster in her bedroom.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm going to say men's volleyball.
That's great. How about your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
Alumni swirl.
Okay. All right. Well, Sarah, we want to thank you for joining us on The People of Penn State. When Penn Staters like you allow us to tell your story, it swells thy fame of dear old state. And for that, we're truly grateful.
Well, I wasn't expecting to cry at the end of this. It gets me every time. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. We'll be in touch.
All right.
I also want to thank our producer, Vincent Longaro, our guest relations coordinator, Abby Clark. If you like this episode, I hope that you'll subscribe to The People of Penn State in your favorite podcast app of choice. And while you're there, go ahead and give us a rating and drop us a review. Help us spread the word and share the podcast with fellow Penn Staters. If you're a member of the Alumni Association, thank you for your support. And if you're not yet a member, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thanks for listening and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are